When my mom's retirement party finally came around, I gave a warm speech and handed her a framed picture of us from my graduation, the one she never came to. She smiled, leaned in, and whispered, "You always make it all about you, don't you?" Everybody laughed. I didn't. Because that morning, I found the legal papers she never thought I'd see, and I brought copies with me. What happens when the person who should have loved you most, instead designs a life of calculated pain, and then steals your future out from under you? I'm talking about more than just a family secret. I'm talking about a betrayal so cold, it made me question everything. The fake smiles at family gatherings always felt heavier than the humid air in my childhood home. It was a suffocating kind of love, the kind that came with an asterisk, a silent clause that said, "You're mine to mold, not to truly see." That feeling, that constant low hum of being misunderstood, followed me like a shadow for decades. My name's Ethan. I'm 29. And this isn't just some petty family spat. This is about years of silence, one-sided affection, manipulation masked as maternal concern, and the moment I finally stopped playing nice. Growing up, I learned quickly that love came with conditions in our house. My mother, Brenda, was the type of woman who could make a compliment feel like a critique. "You got an A, that's nice. But you could have gotten an A+ if you didn't waste so much time drawing." Or, "You look handsome today. You should dress like that more often. Not like how you usually look." She wore disappointment like perfume, subtle, lingering, always present. My father, David, wasn't actively cruel. He was just absent. A shadow in the hallway. A pair of eyes behind a newspaper. Sometimes, I truly believe he stayed quiet just to survive her. I was an only child, so you'd think I'd get all the attention. I did, but not the kind that warms your heart. More like the kind that leaves a tightness in your chest even when everything seems fine. She monitored my hobbies like they were threats. If I played piano, she'd scoff, "That's a waste of time unless you're going to be the next Beethoven." If I drew, she'd ask, "How is that going to pay the bills?" And when I got into a good university on a partial scholarship for graphic design, she barely looked up from her phone. "Well, don't expect us to pay for the rest," she muttered, like it was a given. I told her I'd take out loans. Her only reply was, "Good. Maybe you'll finally learn the value of money." Despite all of that, I still wanted her approval. I think some part of me believed that if I just achieved enough, she'd finally look at me like I mattered. I chased that feeling all through college. I graduated early, at the top of my class. I even had a job lined up before the ceremony. I invited her and Dad to my graduation, sent the email, followed up with a call. She said she'd see if they could make it, like it was brunch and not the culmination of 4 years of struggle. The morning of the ceremony, I waited in my cap and gown, scanning the crowd. I kept telling myself they were just late. Maybe traffic. Maybe parking was bad. But the ceremony came and went, and they never showed. Later that night, I got a text. "Hope it went well. We were too tired after the week we had. Congrats though." That was it. No call, no gift, not even a photo like the ones I saw my classmates posting, smiling with their parents, arms around each other, framed diplomas in hand. I had a friend snap a photo of me alone, holding the diploma in one hand and a coffee in the other, trying not to look like I was waiting for someone who never came. I kept that photo. Printed it. Framed it. I don't know why. Maybe to remind myself that I made it anyway. After graduation, I kept my distance. I got an apartment in the city, threw myself into work. I stopped calling unless I absolutely had to. They didn't notice. Birthdays became text messages. Holidays became, "Sorry, we're traveling this year." They retired early, both of them, thanks to some smart investments and a hefty inheritance from my mother's parents. They bought a charming retreat near Lake Tahoe and started posting photos of wine tastings and sailing trips like they were social media influencers. Suddenly, they were that couple. Coordinated outfits, smiling at sunset, captioning everything with cringy hashtags like #blessedlife and #emptynestgoals. It was surreal. So, when I got the invitation to my mother's retirement party, I honestly thought it was a mistake. It came in the mail, gold foil lettering and everything. "You're invited to celebrate Brenda's incredible journey," it read, with RSVP details and a note that said, "Dress to impress. Speech is welcome." At first, I considered ignoring it. I hadn't seen them in over a year, but something in me itched. Maybe it was the part that still wanted a real goodbye. Maybe it was the years of swallowed words and fake smiles finally bubbling up. I told them I'd be there. My mother texted back with a thumbs up emoji. That was it. "No, can't wait to see you." "No, glad you're coming." Just a reaction, like she was RSVPing to her own son's presence. I almost didn't go. I spent the week leading up to it debating. But 2 nights before the party, I got a call from my cousin Chloe, one of the few family members who actually treated me like I mattered. She sounded weirdly nervous. "Hey, Ethan. I was cleaning out Grandpa's old study with Aunt Carol, and we found something weird. It has your name on it." That got my attention. "What do you mean?" "There's a file. Legal documents. Looks like a trust or some kind of inheritance thing. Your name's listed as the original beneficiary, but there's a note added from your mother's lawyer. Dated 3 years ago. It's been changed." My stomach sank. "Changed how?" She paused. "I think you need to come see for yourself." I'm not sure I should say more over the phone. I drove down the next morning, and what I found in that folder cracked everything open. There, in black and white, was the trust my grandfather had set up for me. A sizable amount, more than I'd ever known he had. He'd left me $250,000, a starter fund for a house or business, something to give me a leg up after college. But 3 years ago, right after my graduation, a new amendment had been added. The money was now being managed by my mother. And the distribution? Gone. Delayed indefinitely until deemed appropriate by guardian. Guardian. I was 26 when she signed that. I asked Chloe how she found it. She told me Carol had kept the originals when Grandpa passed, even though Brenda had insisted she handle the estate. The amended version was never discussed with the family. No wonder I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the copy Chloe made me. My hands were shaking. I kept thinking about all those years I scraped by, worked double shifts, skipped meals to make rent, while my mother sat in a charming retreat near Lake Tahoe sipping imported wine, holding on to something my grandfather intended for me. And now she wanted a retirement party. Fine, she'd get one. A perfect, unforgettable one. I printed the documents, all of them, highlighted the key changes, tucked them into a leather folder. Then I dug through my old box of college stuff until I found that framed photo from graduation, the one I took alone, holding a coffee instead of my parents' hands. And I packed both. Because if she wanted a speech, she was about to get one. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what she whispered in my ear the moment I handed her that photo in front of 80 people. "I'll never forget it." She smiled, leaned in with that fake warmth she reserved for appearances, and said, "You always make everything about you, don't you?" Everyone laughed, thought it was a joke. I didn't. Because in my jacket pocket was the folder she never thought I'd find. And I brought copies. I stood there on that polished banquet hall floor, applause echoing around me like I wasn't even in the room. Everyone thought it was sweet, nostalgic, poetic, the framed photo, the heartfelt speech, the smile on my face. They didn't see the tremble in my fingers or the tightness in my jaw. They didn't hear what she whispered. They didn't know that the very photo I gave her was proof of the thing she never wanted to talk about, that she wasn't there. "You always make everything about you, don't you?" Her voice was honey and venom, so soft, only I could hear it. She smiled while she said it. Everyone laughed like it was a cute inside joke between mother and son. My father clapped. He clapped. I hadn't spoken to him in months. And he clapped like he was proud of me. Or maybe just proud of how well I played my role. I walked off the small stage, that fake smile stuck on my face like glue. My heart was hammering. I kept hearing her voice on a loop. That same passive-aggressive sneer I'd grown up with, but now magnified by years of distance. And for a second, I questioned myself. Maybe I was making too much of it. Maybe I should just let it go. It's a party. It's her day. Don't ruin it. Then I remembered the legal documents in my jacket pocket. The highlighter marks. The section with my name crossed out. The amendment signed in ink. Her signature right there next to a line that essentially robbed me of what my grandfather wanted me to have. Not delayed. Taken. That's when the guilt evaporated. The rest of the party blurred. Relatives I hadn't seen in years came up to me with champagne glasses and fake grins. You look so grown up. Your speech made me tear up. Your mom is just so proud of you. I nodded, smiled, pretended I hadn't just been emotionally slapped across the face by the woman they were all here to celebrate. And then I saw her across the room, standing near the dessert table, laughing with her sisters. Brenda, my mother, dressed in soft rose gold, pearls around her neck, wine in hand, like she was in a magazine shoot. She looked peaceful, relaxed, like someone who thought the past could never catch up to her. I didn't approach her then. I needed to breathe first. I stepped outside, past the clusters of smokers, and into the empty parking lot where the cold night air hit me like a reset button. I pulled out the documents again, read them one more time. Every line, every phrase. She hadn't even tried to cover it up. It was all legal. Quietly signed, filed, and buried. I don't know how long I stood out there, just staring at the paper like it might rewrite itself. Eventually, Chloe came out. She'd been watching me from the corner of the room the whole night, eyes flicking between me and my mother like she knew something was about to blow. You okay? She asked softly. No, I said. But I will be. She didn't ask more. She just stood beside me for a while, arms crossed against the cold. Finally, she said, you know, you don't owe her your silence. That hit harder than I expected. I'd been carrying my silence like it was a family heirloom. Something passed down. But it wasn't protection. It was a muzzle. And I was done wearing it. The breaking point didn't come in one big explosion. It came in pieces. Little moments piling up until the weight crushed whatever was left of my patience. It started with the slideshow. Back inside, someone dimmed the lights and a projector flickered on. A tribute to Brenda, it said in bold cursive. A slideshow of her life, her childhood, her graduation, her wedding. Then baby photos of me, school portraits, family vacations. But something felt off. There were no photos of me past the age of 15. Nothing from high school, nothing from college, no birthday photos, no graduation, no awards. It was like I stopped existing once I became old enough to form my own opinions. And then came the kicker. Near the end of the slideshow, one of the final photos was of a framed certificate, a donation in her name to a local children's charity. In the caption, it said, in honor of my future grandchildren, may they always know they're wanted. I sat there frozen. There it was. The knife slipped in with a smile. She knew I didn't want kids. I told her years ago during one of the few conversations we'd had post-college. She brushed it off then, told me I'd change my mind or meet the right woman. I told her I was dating a man. She didn't speak to me for 6 months. And now she was taking jabs in a slideshow. After the presentation, people started making their way to the dance floor. My dad gave a short, dry toast to Brenda for being the glue of our family. I nearly choked. Glue. If she was the glue, I was the piece that never quite stuck. Then came the final straw. It was subtle. It always was with her. I caught a conversation between her and Aunt Carol. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I was close enough to the snack table when it happened. I was surprised Ethan came, Carol said, sipping her drink. Brenda laughed lightly. Oh, you know Ethan, always needing to make a scene. I'm sure he thinks this party is about him. Carol didn't reply. The silence lingered. He's always been so dramatic, Brenda continued. Honestly, sometimes I think he stayed away all these years just to punish me. That's how he works. Always trying to guilt people into giving him attention. Carol gave her a look. Or maybe he stayed away because you never showed up for him. I'll give her credit. My mother didn't flinch. Oh, please. He was always overly sensitive. You know how boys are these days. Can't even handle a little tough love. Tough love. That's what she called it. I walked away before I did something I'd regret. But inside, something broke. I'd been telling myself for years that maybe, just maybe, she didn't realize what she was doing. That maybe she didn't know how much it hurt. That if I just explained it the right way, she'd see it. She'd apologize. But now I knew. She saw everything. She remembered it all. And she didn't care. That was the night I stopped trying. I left the party early, but not before slipping a few copies of the legal documents into a padded envelope and tucking it into her coat pocket. I knew she'd find it when she got home. I wanted her to know I knew. No dramatic scene, no confrontation, just quiet, cold proof. The next morning, I woke up to a missed call from my father and a text from my mother that read, "I don't know what you think you're trying to do, but you're not entitled to anything. Grandpa changed his mind, and that's final. If you needed money, you could have just asked." I stared at the message for a long time. She was lying. Grandpa hadn't changed anything. She had, and I had the paperwork to prove it. I didn't respond. Instead, I booked a meeting with an estate attorney, and I started making phone calls, because if she wanted to play the victim, she was about to learn what it felt like when the mask came off. Rock bottom isn't always a dramatic event. Sometimes it's a slow realization, a quiet moment where everything just stops. For me, it came 2 days after the party, when I sat on the floor of my apartment, still in my clothes from the day before. Phone turned face down on the coffee table, the envelope of legal documents beside me like a forgotten weapon. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I just felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left only the shape of who I used to be. My mother's message still sat unread in my inbox, but her words were burned into my memory, "You're not entitled to anything." It echoed in my head louder than the actual party music. I kept hearing her voice say it with that same tone she used when I was 12 and asked for a bigger slice of cake, or 17 and wanted to skip Thanksgiving to work on a college portfolio. Like wanting anything at all, was a weakness. Like I was a burden for having expectations. Like I should be grateful for crumbs. But here's the thing, grief and anger aren't opposites. They dance together. And the deeper the grief, the hotter the anger when it finally ignites. The day after the party, I finally called the estate lawyer whose name was on the original trust document. His name was George, and he sounded older, with a slow, deliberate voice that gave everything weight. "Ethan," he said after I explained who I was and what I'd found. "I remember your grandfather well. He spoke of you often. Are you telling me Brenda altered the distribution terms of the trust without notifying you?" I told him yes. Sent him the documents. He asked if I could come in person. I did. George's office was in a red brick building downtown Philadelphia, tucked between a failing bookstore and a dry cleaner. His waiting room smelled like old paper and coffee, and he greeted me in a navy sweater and glasses that looked like they belonged to a detective in a 1970s cop show. "This," he said, holding up the documents I'd handed him, "is questionable at best. Your grandfather's original instructions were clear. The trust was to be dispersed to you upon graduation. There's no clause allowing your mother to delay or reassign those funds." "But she filed an amendment," I said, already bracing for the worst. "Isn't that legal?" "She filed an addendum through her own legal counsel, not through this office and not with your consent, which makes it legally muddy. At best, it's a manipulation of her temporary executive role. At worst, it's fraud." The word hit me like a cold slap. Fraud? Can I do anything? I asked. He smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the smile of a man who'd seen too many family knives and too many backs. Yes, but the question is, do you want to? I hesitated. Suing my mother wasn't something I'd ever imagined. But then I thought about my rent notices from last year, about skipping meals, about not going to the when I fractured my wrist because I didn't have insurance. About her smiling at that party like she was proud of what she'd done. Yes, I said. I do. George nodded, already reaching for a folder. Then let's get to work. That moment, sitting in that office, watching an actual adult take my side, was the beginning of the rise. But it didn't feel like it right away. In fact, the months that followed nearly broke me again. Word got out fast. First, it was whispers. Cousins texting me cryptic messages like, heard about the drama. You okay? And why are you doing this to your mom? Chloe stayed quiet, but I knew she was fielding calls. Then my dad reached out. Ethan, he said over the phone, his voice tight. What are you doing? She took from me, I replied flatly. It was for your own good. You weren't ready. Don't finish that sentence. There was a long pause. Then a sigh. You know how your mom is. She just wanted to protect the money. She thought you'd waste it. Protect it from who? I asked. Me? The person it was left to? She thought you'd spend it on something stupid. Art school or that apartment downtown. You're impulsive. I graduated early. I've never been in debt. I worked 2 jobs during college. You think I'm impulsive? Another pause. She was grieving, he finally said. Your grandfather passed, and that was 3 years ago. He didn't argue after that, just muttered, this is going to tear the family apart, and hung up. But here's the thing no one tells you. Sometimes a family needs to fall apart so you can finally breathe. For a while, I was the villain. I got texts from relatives I barely knew telling me to be the bigger person, to let it go, that money isn't worth destroying relationships. One even had the audacity to say, she raised you, didn't she? No, she tolerated me. There's a difference. Still, it hurt more than I expected. Every message, every phone call, every awkward silence from people I'd grown up seeing at birthday parties and summer barbecues, it chipped away at me. I started having second thoughts. Was I blowing things out of proportion? Was this really worth it? That was the fall. But then came the rise. I started therapy. It wasn't some grand breakthrough moment, more like a friend of a friend recommendation I followed out of desperation. Her name was Sarah. Mid-40s, glasses, always wore cardigans and mismatched earrings. She never judged, just listened, asked questions, pushed gently. We talked about control, about how my mother controlled not just money but emotions, how she weaponized guilt, how my silence had always been the currency she preferred. You've spent your whole life trying to earn love that was never being offered, she said once. What would your life look like if you stopped trying? That question stuck with me. Around the same time, I threw myself into my work. I was a graphic designer at a mid-size agency. Not glamorous, but solid. I'd always done just enough to get by. Met deadlines. Got the occasional client compliment. But now, I went all in. I redesigned 3 campaigns from scratch. Volunteered for a pitch presentation that landed us a huge client. Stayed late, arrived early, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because it gave me purpose, control. It felt good to build something that couldn't be taken from me. 3 months after the party, my boss called me into her office. I've seen a shift, she said. You're sharper, more focused, and honestly, your work's never been better. I didn't explain why, just nodded. We'd like to move you into a lead role. Creative direction, higher pay, more responsibility. What do you think? I took the offer, and for the first time in years, I didn't call my parents to tell them. I also moved out of the tiny apartment with the squeaky faucet and the unreliable heat. I found a one-bedroom in a quiet building with brick walls and tall windows. The kind of place I'd once dreamed about, but assumed I'd never be able to afford. I bought a new desk, a couch that didn't sag, plants I somehow managed to keep alive. I also framed that graduation photo again, the one where I'm holding the diploma and the coffee, but this time I put it next to another frame, a copy of the original trust document, the real one, with my name intact. And beneath that, a sticky note with the words Sarah had once said to me, "Stop trying to earn what was never being offered." That became my mantra. I stopped attending family events. No birthdays, no Easter brunches, no half-hearted invitations to patch things up. Chloe and I stayed close. She was my one anchor in the storm. But everyone else, I let them fade. I deleted group chats, muted threads, removed myself from the role of family peacekeeper that I'd never signed up for in the first place. And still, I kept rebuilding, quietly, day by day. Then one afternoon, George called. "Ethan," he said. "We've got something." Her counsel offered a settlement. My heart jumped. How much? Half the original amount. No admission of wrongdoing, but they're offering it in exchange for you dropping any further claims. I stared at the wall. Half? After everything? Why not the full amount? I asked. Because they're hoping you'll still play the role. The grateful son. The quiet one. They think you'll settle just to avoid dragging this out. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, "Tell them no. I want to go all the way." There was a pause, then a slow chuckle. "Good," George said. "Because I've already prepared the next motion." That was the day I stopped hoping for closure and started building consequences. It's a strange thing, preparing for revenge. It doesn't feel the way you think it will. There's no maniacal grin, no soundtrack swelling in the background, no single moment where you say, "Now it begins." It's slower, methodical, a quiet, deliberate stacking of dominoes. And you learn very quickly that true revenge doesn't come from rage. It comes from clarity. I had spent most of my life reacting, apologizing when I hadn't done anything wrong. Shrinking to make others comfortable, staying silent so I wouldn't be labeled dramatic, ungrateful, difficult. But now, after everything, the trust documents, the gaslighting, the lies, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning. And I had time. George and I were deep in legal proceedings. Since my mother hadn't just delayed the trust, but had actively diverted the funds, we had a real case. But these things don't move quickly. There were hearings, discovery requests, financial disclosures. Every week brought another envelope in the mail, another email with subject lines like "Update," Brenda's response to interrogatories. It was like peeling back an onion made entirely of red flags. But while the legal wheels turned, I kept busy laying the rest of the groundwork. The first thing I did was upgrade my life, and not just physically. Yes, I had a better apartment, a new role at work, more confidence in my bank account. But what I really started upgrading was my circle. It started with Chloe, who had been my quiet supporter through all of this. She was the one who found the documents, the one who didn't look away when the family started turning. One evening over coffee, I finally said what I'd been thinking for weeks. "I want to make this public." Her eyebrows lifted. "Like, expose her?" I nodded. "Not just the trust. Everything. The favoritism, the lies, how she talks about me behind my back, how she plays the victim. People think she's this perfect matriarch. They need to know who she really is." Chloe sipped her coffee. "You'd be dragging the whole family into it." "They already chose their side," I said. "I'm done protecting their comfort." She looked at me for a long time. Then said, "Okay, if you're serious, I'm in." That was the first ally. The second was George. I asked him one day if there was a way to make the court documents public. Not just the filings, but the correspondence, the statements. He explained that in many states, civil court records are public unless sealed. Ours weren't. So technically, he said, adjusting his glasses, once the trial begins, anyone can read them, even journalists. That gave me an idea. A big one. I started documenting everything. I opened a new folder on my laptop called History. In it, I placed every relevant photo, email, text, and document. Screenshots of conversations, the graduation photo, her texts, the video from the retirement party, yes, someone recorded it, a copy of the trust. I even found a voicemail from a few years back where she berated me for not calling on her birthday, even though she hadn't called me in over 6 months. I began writing it all out. Not as a Reddit post, not yet. As a timeline, a narrative, a map of everything I'd survived. Therapy helped with that. Sarah encouraged me to process it, not just plot it. She knew what I was doing. She never called it revenge. She called it accountability. You're not punishing her, she said. You're just refusing to carry the silence anymore. That line stuck with me. Next, I started researching my mother's social life. It wasn't hard. She'd made herself a bit of a public figure in her community. After retiring from her accounting firm, she joined the local Women's Business League, started a wine tasting club, and even hosted quarterly charity brunches at the lake house. She was, in every sense, the face of graceful retirement. She also had a carefully curated social media page full of inspirational quotes, humble brags, and photos of her latest charity work. I knew she loved that image. It was her shield, her mask, and I knew exactly how to dismantle it. But I wasn't reckless. This wasn't going to be a public tantrum. No angry posts, no shouting. From rooftops. I wanted everything to be clean. I wanted the truth to speak louder than my anger. And that meant waiting for the right moment. That moment came sooner than I expected. 3 months after the party, I got a formal invitation in the mail. Hand-lettered cream cardstock, wax seal. It was for the Business League's spring gala, hosted at, where else? My parents' lake house. Black tie, formal dinner, silent auction, press coverage, honoring Brenda for her outstanding service to the community. I stared at the invitation for a long time. She had no idea it was coming full circle. I RSVP'd with a yes. In the weeks leading up to the gala, I met with George twice a week. We prepared summaries, visual aids, timelines. We gathered signed statements. Chloe wrote a letter detailing how she found the documents. Carol, quietly and off the record, confirmed that my grandfather's original wishes had never included any amendments. She refused to get involved officially, said she was too old for war, but she said something that struck me. She's always needed to control the story, she said. But you're taking the pen back. That's what this was, a reclamation, not just of money or dignity or justice, but of narrative. Around this time, I started quietly reaching out to journalists. I didn't pitch a scandal. I pitched a story, son challenges estate manipulation after discovering mother rerouted inheritance. I kept it anonymous, just initial inquiries. I didn't want to pull the trigger until I had everything lined up, but I kept the lines warm. Then I created a digital packet, a private website, password protected. It contained the timeline, the documents, the proof. A section called Before, with photos of me as a kid, and a section called After, with emails and texts that showed how things changed. I sent the link to George, to Chloe, to Sarah. All of them said the same thing, it's undeniable. Still, I waited. The night before the gala, I got a call from my dad. He hadn't spoken to me in weeks. I heard you're coming tomorrow, he said, voice cautious. I am. There was a pause. She's nervous. I didn't reply. She's been different since the party. I still didn't speak. She's your mother, he finally said. No matter what happened. No, I said quietly. She's not. She's the woman who raised me. That's not the same thing. He didn't argue, just said, see you tomorrow, and hung up. The day of the gala, I dressed carefully. Black suit, clean shave, calm expression. I arrived just as the sun was setting over the lake, casting everything in that golden hour glow my mother loved for her photos. Guests were already mingling in the garden, sipping champagne, laughing under string lights. It was picturesque. And fake. I walked through the crowd with practiced ease, smiling, nodding, accepting compliments. People asked what I'd been up to. I told them I'd been rebuilding. No one asked what that meant. When I finally saw her, she was at the center of it all, standing under a white arch covered in ivy, posing for photos with some local councilwoman. She looked radiant, polished, unshaken. But then she saw me, and for the first time in years, she flinched. I gave her a slight nod and kept walking. Later that evening, during the dinner, there was a program, speeches, awards, applause. And then the host stepped up to the mic, and now, a very special surprise for our guest of honor. Brenda's son, Ethan, has prepared a tribute. Let's give him a warm welcome. I hadn't told anyone I'd be speaking. She looked stunned. I walked up slowly, folder in hand, smiled at the crowd, adjusted the mic. Thank you, I began. I'll keep this brief. My voice was calm, clear, no shaking hands, no anger. My mother has always been good at curating moments, photos, events, appearances. Tonight is one of them. And I want to thank her truly for teaching me something invaluable, the power of image. I paused, scanning the crowd. But images aren't the full story. So tonight, I brought the full story. I held up the folder. This is a copy of the trust left to me by my grandfather. It was intended to be distributed to me upon graduation. It was legally binding, witnessed, and notarized. But 3 years ago, it was altered without my consent and rerouted. A quiet rustle swept through the room. My mother's face went pale. I won't bore you with legal jargon. You'll be able to read it all yourselves. I've made copies. They're available at the check-in table as you leave. A few gasps. A couple people shifting uncomfortably. And if you'd like to read the full timeline, texts, emails, legal filings, they're available at this link. I gave the link out loud, slowly, clearly, because stories like these, about control and silence and manipulation, they don't just happen behind closed doors. They happen in front of string lights and photo booths. They happen with a smile. I turned to her, then looked her in the eye. I'm done smiling. Then I stepped down. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't need it. The walk back to my seat felt like stepping through molasses. Every eye in the room was pinned to me, some wide with disbelief, others squinting with judgment, and a few watching with something that almost looked like admiration. I didn't make eye contact with anyone. Not my father, who was now hunched in his chair, gaze fixed on his water glass. Not my mother, who sat perfectly still at the head table, her wine untouched, her expression frozen in that delicate balance between outrage and panic. I slid back into my seat beside Chloe, whose hand was gripping her clutch like it was the only thing tethering her to the earth. She whispered, "You actually did it." Like she just watched someone climb Everest in flip-flops. I whispered back. I didn't need a bite of the fancy dinner they served after. I didn't need to. The satisfaction simmering in my chest was more than enough to keep me full. There was no dramatic outburst from Brenda. No table flipping or shouting match. That wasn't her style. Her rage was a slow boil, internal, quiet, and designed to preserve her image. So instead, she smiled. She nodded when people leaned in to whisper. She kept her back straight and her voice level. But I could see it, the unraveling. By the time dessert was served, guests were already on their phones. I caught one man, some real estate agent who'd once introduced her at a fundraiser, scrolling through the site I'd linked. His brows furrowed deeper with every swipe. Another woman near the back raised her hand and asked too loudly, "Is this true?" as if she were asking about a cancelled reservation, not a fraudulent diversion of a six-figure inheritance. Brenda stood slowly and gave a tight, practiced smile. "Ethan has always been very imaginative," she said to the room. "He gets that from his grandfather." It was a feeble deflection. No one laughed. And then the questions began. She deflected. She redirected. She insisted it was a private family matter. That context was missing. That the legal process would clarify everything. But even the most well-groomed reputation can't withstand paper proof. And I brought receipts, all of them. The next morning, the link to the private website went viral in Phoenix's social circles. George had timed it perfectly. A motion to publicly file the full case details was submitted that same morning, and I gave a single anonymous interview to a small but credible local journalist. The headline was surgical: retired accountant accused of estate manipulation by estranged son. Public trial looms. They didn't need to name her. Everyone knew who it was. Within a week, the fallout had begun. The Women's Business League suspended her membership, pending internal review. The spring charity she helped co-chair removed her photo from their website and announced a change in leadership. Her wine club, which was more about status than Sauvignon Blanc, quietly canceled their next event. No one said it out loud, but her name had become a liability. She wasn't just a retired accountant anymore. She was a headline. I never heard from her directly, not a text, not an email, not a voicemail. She did reach out to George's office once, asking if we'd consider a private settlement and retraction of public materials. George called me the second he hung up. "She's cracking," he said. "You want to end this now?" I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the phone in my hand, thinking about the years I spent bending over backward for a woman who couldn't be bothered to show up to my graduation, who rewrote a trust behind closed doors, who smiled through every lie and made me feel like the crazy one for noticing. "No," I said. "We finish it." The case proceeded slowly, but with momentum. Depositions began. And in those, everything came out. That she'd used the money as a safety fund to renovate the lake house, new deck, updated kitchen, even a hot tub. That she'd transferred part of the amount into an account in her name. That she told her lawyer I was too unstable to manage that much money, citing vague, unverifiable examples of reckless behavior, none of which held up under scrutiny. It wasn't just a breach of trust. It was financial mistreatment. And the court saw it that way. 5 months after the gala, the ruling came in. Brenda was ordered to repay the full original trust amount plus interest. She was also fined for misrepresentation and stripped of her authority as executive for any remaining family trusts. The judge's comments were damning. This court finds that Miss Brenda Caldwell used her temporary position of authority not to honor the wishes of the deceased, but to control and manipulate the beneficiary, Ethan Caldwell, for personal gain. It was everything I could have hoped for. But that wasn't the final blow. That came the next morning, because while the legal process had done its job, the court of public opinion was still in session, and someone had leaked the full deposition transcript to the local media. It wasn't me, and I won't speculate who it was. But suddenly, quotes from Brenda's own mouth were splashed across news blogs and community forums. He was always too sensitive. I couldn't trust him with that kind of money. I did what I had to do. The backlash was swift. Former colleagues publicly distanced themselves. A women's networking group she once mentored issued a statement about taking allegations of financial misconduct seriously. Even her former accounting firm, which she hadn't worked at in years, issued a vague but brutal statement. The values described in recent reports do not reflect those of our organization. She was radioactive. My dad, meanwhile, sent a single text. "I hope you're proud of yourself." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in my life, I was. I used part of the court-awarded funds to pay off the last of my student loans. I donated some to a scholarship program for first-generation college students. And the rest? I invested in a design studio I'd always dreamed of starting. A small, independent branding agency that focused on helping local artists and nonprofits build their visual identity. I named it Frame and Foundry. The name came from two places: the photo frame I gave my mother at her party, and the fact that sometimes, to find yourself, you have to forge your own path from molten pieces. Business was slow at first, then steady, then good. By the 1-year anniversary of the gala, we were profitable. I had a team, a space, clients who trusted me, people who saw me. And the best part? I didn't owe any of it to her. I kept going to therapy, not because I was broken, but because healing isn't a finish line, it's maintenance. And I'd neglected mine for too long. Sarah once said, "Revenge doesn't heal wounds. But justice gives you a clean surface to start stitching." She was right. Eventually, people stopped bringing her up. The headlines faded. New scandals emerged. Life moved on. But the silence was different now. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't sharp. It was mine. I didn't go to her house again. Not when she had surgery. Not when they downsized. Not even when her sister passed. I sent a condolence card. Signed it, Ethan. Nothing more. Chloe and I stayed close. She became like a sister to me, the kind you choose, not the one you're born into. On the 1-year anniversary of my grandfather's passing, she brought over his old chess set and said, "He'd be proud of you." I believed her. The photo from graduation still sits on my desk. But now there's a second frame beside it, a photo of the day I signed the lease to my studio. I'm holding the keys, smiling in a way I never used to fully, honestly. And sometimes when I look at those two photos side by side, the boy who waited for someone to show up, and the man who showed up for himself, I smile too. Because in the end, my revenge wasn't just about making her pay. It was about proving beyond a doubt that I never needed her permission to succeed. I just needed the truth. And I brought copies. If you've ever felt like your narrative was stolen, or if you had to fight for the truth to be heard, what did you do? Share your stories and thoughts in the comments below. I'm listening.